Welcome to episode 99 of the GTO on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 20 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is Federal Analyst Anshel Sag. Let's get started with my first topic. In news this week broke that Vodafone and Three UK are discussing a possible merger. The question that I have is, what would that mean for 5G in the United Kingdom? Both Vodafone and Three UK represent the 3rd and 4th largest operators in the United Kingdom. And if we sort of look at what happened with T-Mobile and Sprint, the consolidation of spectrum and their success and achieving a lot of milestones in the US, like first to standalone and that sort of thing, it could be quite compelling. There have been pundits that have been discussing the need to consolidate the operator footprint within the United Kingdom, but I'm wondering, Anshel, if you have any insight here.
Yeah, I think when you look at the size of somebody like BT, who also is a result of consolidation, I think that it's difficult for smaller operators like CK Hutchinson's 3 or Vodafone to compete in the market in a way that their larger competitors can.
Yeah.
So I think there's a reason for this consolidation, but ultimately, the biggest concerns with these kinds of mergers is mostly a lack of competition and pricing for consumers. So I think the best way that this merger could move forward would be to ensure that prices will not go up on consumers. In the T-Mobile scenario, they've actually helped bring prices down as a result of their merger.
Right.
But even they did raise some of their prices on certain things. So I think it's it's always a challenge, but it's important to make sure that consumers aren't hurt by this, and that the goal with this merger is to improve consumer choice and competition, even if there is some consolidation.
Yeah, those are great insights. The other thing that I think about is that there's been some very interesting sharing of CapEx with respect to RAN deployment between Vodafone and Three and other operators, which is quite interesting. And that might have been a portend to the news that broke this week. But it'll be interesting to see how this all rolls out. There aren't a lot of details that are publicly available, but as things materialize, we'll definitely come back and share that on a future podcast. But let's move to your first topic this week. And Qualcomm 5G Summit occurred, and you wanted to go hit the highlights.
Yeah, so this week was a bit of a disaster as far as events go.
Right.
Every day there was another event.
Yeah.
You and I attended a MediaTek event the same day as a Qualcomm event.
Right.
After that, it was Google I/O the next day, and then after that, Samsung had their 6G forum. So
Intel had their Now event that I attended in Dallas, and there was also a Juniper Summit as well. So you're right.
That went to IBM. It was a
disaster. And IBM, yeah, IBM. Yeah.
And there was an SAP event on Monday. So Qualcomm 5G Summit happened here in San Diego, and I think it was a little bit lighter than usual in terms of announcements. I think that might just be because of its timing. It's usually later in the year.
Yeah.
And this year they kind of moved it up. But what's interesting is it's very close to MWC. So I feel like a lot of the announcements happen at MWC. But there are obviously some announcements that were still saved for this event. And one of those was the announcement of a new drone platform. But it's really not just for drones. It's actually for robotics in general. Qualcomm kind of sees drones as a form of robotics.
Yeah.
So this platform is called the RB5. And I kind of pressed them on this in the pre-briefings, asking them, what is the RB5 based on? Because all of Qualcomm's IP in these adjacent 5G use cases are based on something from the mobile sector. So is it based on a Snapdragon 888 or is it a HN1? I didn't get a clear answer on that. Hopefully I will soon. But this RB5 platform is a 5G based robotics platform, so it can enable 5G robots, drones, and anything else that would be considered a robot. And in addition to that, they did announce some new X70 AI features for the X70 modem, which it already had announced at MWC, but they added some new features that will enhance coverage and improve battery life, and in general improve the capabilities of the modem in software using AI. One of those is called Qualcomm Transmit 3.0, which is a capability that adds superior transmission across cellular, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth. So it basically improves uplink performance and energy efficiency. And then they also showed off that the X70 modem is the first to achieve 5G mmWave standalone. And they were able to do that with 8 100 megahertz millimeter carriers, so 8 carrier aggregation, achieving 8.3 gigabits per second. So that's kind of the big key items that were announced at this show. But they talked about PCs, the metaverse, automotive, all the different aspects of 5G that Qualcomm has expanded into outside of the smartphone.
Yeah, and also I am pinning a blog that will be posting to the More Insights and Strategy website. I'll also be sharing that on social media. I provide some insights into that robotics announcement that you were just mentioning, as well as a announcement on enabling Open RAN with an operator in Vietnam. And also recap a podcast that we did with Qualcomm just prior to 5G Summit, where we go into how Qualcomm is enabling both vRAN and Open RAN. And we've got some great guests from Vodafone, as well as AT&T and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. So stay tuned for that on my social media handle at WillTownTech, and I'm sure our GTO and 5G handle will share that as well. But let me move to my second topic this week, and I'm actually going to take a topic that you would typically take because it deals with the metaverse. But Meta Platforms is teaming up with AMD for an Open RAN solution. The first question that came to my mind was, will this help or hinder 5G deployment with another Open RAN solution path? So the details are basically Meta is going to leverage AMD's Xilinx UltraScale RF SoC, and this will be used in multiple Evenstar radio units. And we've talked about Evenstar in the past. It is an initiative to broadly sort of drive disaggregation in general around cellular infrastructure, and this sort of follows a similar announcement with Marvell in 2021. So I mean, AMD is jumping into the game now. No surprise, Intel is in the game, Qualcomm is in the game. I always talk about how innovation breeds, or actually competition breeds innovation. So this is likely a good thing, just another flexible path to Open RAN. But wondering, since you're so focused on the metaverse and Meta, and by the way, Meta is sort of branding or positioning this to be metaverse ready from a RAN perspective, but would love to get your insights.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not entirely sure about Meta's role in stuff like Open RAN. From what I understand, their capabilities in networking and infrastructure are mostly limited to advising operators on how to optimize their networks for Meta's applications and Meta's future applications. So currently video and social media, but future metaverse and VR and AR. I just think that I'm not really sure how much of this work will actually find its way into a commercial network.
Yeah.
Which I think has been the challenge for Meta and their connectivity business from the beginning. They have their telecom infrastructure project.
Yep.
But I'm not really clear on how much of that has actually yielded real changes in the way that operators deploy their infrastructure. So if anything, I think it's a good research project for them and the industry. And, hopefully they are solving some problems that others haven't solved yet, or are accelerating the rate of innovation. but I'm not entirely sure, one, what this really means for AMD in terms of, shipping product,
Yeah.
or for Meta platforms, how much this really changes what they're doing on their day to day. So
Yeah.
it does sound like an interesting announcement, but I because of Meta's place in the 5G um, infrastructure landscape, I'm not entirely sure that I would consider this as relevant as, say, some other hyperscaler CSP
Hmm.
running some, other third-party applications.
Yeah. Those are great insights. And you touched on tip. And, before Facebook, decided to create Meta and then have all the other companies like Facebook and Instagram and whatnot underneath, Facebook was very focused on tip, and the original intent of tip was to reduce the cost of connectivity, making broadband more accessible on a global basis. So from my perspective, this is sort of a repositioning of what they were doing prior to sort of Meta coming together, and it's sort of a clever way, I think, to have something to state about optimizing infrastructure around the metaverse, but time will tell. But let's move to your second topic this week. And you mentioned this already, but both you and I attended the MediaTek Analyst Summit, and you wanted to provide your insights, and I'm sure I will as well. But take it away.
Yeah, so this event was a little bit of a hybrid of both public and NDA information. Obviously, I won't be talking about the NDA information, but some of those embargoes will lift at the end of the month, and we will talk about them.
Mhm.
That said, what we can talk about is that they did announce their AIoT platform, which um, didn't seem like it was necessarily focused on 5G yet, but does sound like something that they are going to have move and transition to 5G in the near future. I wasn't actually very clear on that point,
Yeah.
but in general, this company has a lot of experience in IoT specifically when you look at consumer applications.
Mhm.
So it's going to be very interesting to see how the company transitions to a broader IoT business that incorporates enterprise. I still think they have a lot of work to do in terms of meeting what enterprise requires of IoT applications.
Mhm.
But MediaTek has also done a very good job of showing that they can provide value in places where their competitors can't. That's how they've been able to grow to the size that they are today.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see where this goes, but I also think it's still very early, and I hope to see them build this out more and invest more in developer ecosystem and capabilities.
My big takeaway, because you have spent a lot more time with MediaTek in the past than I have, but my big takeaway was just, number one, they're not a value play. So my perception was strictly a value play relative to Qualcomm. They, to your point, I mean, they're in a ton of consumer devices. I think they're like number one in TV and smart TV integration, right? Um, and a lot of other, like you mentioned, consumer. And I was also impressed with the fact that they are also powering a lot of the fixed wireless access solutions, in particular T-Mobile's latest offering. And I think that's a great platform for them to build, upon. But I did come away with the thought, and this was your conclusion as well on the IoT end of things, that they are very, very consumer focused when compared to Qualcomm. Qualcomm is much more balanced when you look at what they're doing within the enterprise and within consumer. So those will definitely be areas they have to work on. But I was also blown away by their revenue growth over the last year. I mean, growing from $10+ billion to nearly $19 billion in revenue, they're obviously doing something right. So I believe MediaTek is someone to keep your eye on. You mentioned the IoT. You and I were in breakouts around IoT. Bill Curtis, our IoT analyst, was also in attendance with us at the event. And I asked Bill after the event, your thoughts. And Bill brings a lot of experience with respect to IoT, and he felt like they have great potential. They've got a great platform, but to your point, they're going to have to find ways to take that into enterprise. One of the biggest opportunities, obviously, is industrial, massive IoT. And so time will tell, but I came away just with some misperceptions corrected, that this company and MediaTek has a lot of potential. So, But let's move to my third and final topic this week, and I want to talk about ZTE. And my question is, are they on a slippery slope with respect to cellular infrastructure sales to Russia? Both Huawei and ZTE have been confronted, unequivocally and asked what their intentions are with respect to the Russian market, given the current geopolitical environment. Certainly, companies like Ericsson and Nokia have stated very bluntly that they are ceasing any sort of sales into the Russian market. Huawei basically didn't acknowledge, the question when they were confronted with it. The challenge with ZTE is that they incorporate a lot of US components within their infrastructure. And if we all remember, they got the death penalty a few years ago selling restricted technology to countries of concern. And so that, from my perspective, they're on a slippery slope. They haven't acknowledged what they're doing. Could there be another death penalty coming? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think they're setting themselves up for failure.
Yeah.
Especially once entity lists are created for Russian companies. I think it's a matter of time until those happen, because this war is still relatively new.
Yeah.
And there's probably lots of conversations about how to cut off Russian suppliers. So yeah, I think this is a scenario where I think ZTE and Huawei both see an opportunity in the short term, but in the long term, it's potentially very damaging. And I think if Huawei and ZTE are doing business with Russian operators, they're probably doing it on a very cash basis,
Right.
not allowing for any credit or product to deliver until it is fully paid for.
Yeah.
So, I think Russian operators are obviously very limited in what hardware they have access to, so they'll take what they can get. But the Russian infrastructure, isn't necessarily where it could be, and they still probably have lots of deployment to do as the operators like Megaphone and stuff.
Yeah.
But I just think they're going to struggle to roll out their 5G, even with help of Huawei and ZTE, which I believe are probably going to be very limited in how they try to engage.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One of the ways that sort of Huawei conquered the world was with their credit facilities that were backed by the Chinese government. And I agree with you. I mean, a lot of those deals are going to have to be under the table when you look at just the devaluation of the ruble and what's going on with the economy, with many countries around the world cutting off oil exports from Russia. A friend of mine once described Russia as just basically a big giant gas can from a GDP perspective. And so that's putting a lot of pressure on their economy for obvious reasons. But yeah, if Huawei continues to engage, they continue to dig themselves a hole with respect to their reputation on the world scene. And then ZTE again risks a death penalty because they are using a lot of US supply chain components in their infrastructure. So it'll be interesting to see how this all winds out. But let's move to your third and final topic. You want to talk about an OpenSignal report that just published.
Yeah, so our good friend Ian Fogg, fellow analyst at OpenSignal, published a blog with lots of interesting data points around the use of 5G for gaming versus public Wi-Fi. Obviously, 5G millimeter wave blew everything out of the water. But what was interesting was that in terms of gamer experience between December of 2021 and February of 2022, they were able to measure that 5G's experience was almost identical to home Wi-Fi and better than public Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
And if you look at the data, 5G millimeter wave was obviously 25 times faster than public Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
But 5G was also 5 times faster than public Wi-Fi and faster than most people's home Wi-Fi. So giving people the ability to access faster speeds and lower latencies will give people better gaming experience, because one of the big problems with mobile gaming is mobile games are fairly large.
Yeah.
If you want to download a game, a lot of times it will tell you have to go to Wi-Fi. So it's going to be interesting to see, with 5G becoming more prevalent and mid-band being more well deployed. I think you're going to see fewer games asking you to connect to Wi-Fi, because there's probably a possibility that when you connect to Wi-Fi, it'll be slower than staying on 5G to download those files. But it was very interesting because 5G Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi infrastructure still hasn't really been upgraded to the point where it's more secure.
Right.
Unless it's Wi-Fi 6, it's not as secure as 5G.
Right.
And if you're doing microtransactions while gaming, you obviously want that to be a secure connection. So I think there's a lot of reasons why you would prefer to game over 5G. And the thing is, when it comes to gaming, once you've downloaded the big game itself, gaming doesn't really use that much data anyways. You're actually much more sensitive about latency.
Yeah.
And 5G latencies are also very competitive, if not better than Wi-Fi. And I don't think there was any mention of latency in this report. It was mentioned once, but there was no data on actual latency. But I believe their gamer experience index incorporates latency and jitter as well as packet loss. So they were already saying that in terms of experience, 5G is better than public Wi-Fi, which does incorporate those metrics. But I think it would be interesting to look at public Wi-Fi latency alone and compare that to 5G for gaming, because I have a feeling that mobile gamers will be much more sensitive to latency than anything.
I totally agree with you. And you sort of touched on, the whole notion of Wi-Fi. I think there are two factors that are driving the lack of performance with public Wi-Fi. One, to your point, most of the deployments are not going to be Wi-Fi 6. They're going to be older versions of Wi-Fi. So that's one thing. Wi-Fi 6 does deliver significant improvements, to your point, in security and latency. And I absolutely agree with you. Low latency is the key to a better mobile gaming experience. Once we get to standalone 5G, that should be around the sub 5 millisecond level, versus an older standard of Wi-Fi could be anywhere from 20 to 40 milliseconds. So quantum level difference in performance with respect to latency. And then the other issue with public Wi-Fi is oversubscription. And my experience when I'm out and about, whether I'm in my home base of Austin, Texas, or whatnot, there's so much variability with respect to individual businesses that have deployed consumer grade routers versus city or county or municipal deployments of Wi-Fi, and just sizing it correctly. And there's always going to be oversubscription challenges as well. So I think those are the two factors that kind of position Wi-Fi in a worse light relative to 5G for mobile gaming. But it's interesting. I mean,
I also wanted to say, like, mobile devices like the Steam Deck are also very likely to increase, mobile gamers wanting to play over 5G and not Wi-Fi. And this device is actually Wi-Fi only, which I think is a pitfall, in the sense that, like, you can only game when you have Wi-Fi. But I do think these kinds of devices are going to become 5G enabled as well.
Yeah, and certainly, Apple with iPad is integrating 5G into their devices as well, and we'll see more of that. And I think the other thing that you and I learned at the MediaTek Analyst Summit was that they are focusing on growing that whole 5G embedded notebook business as well. So that's another form factor. I mean, you're not necessarily going to mobile game. I mean, that's probably more casual, like, in between flights and that sort of thing. But as device support grows, I think so will just the taxing on Wi-Fi networks. So, but hey, buddy, another great podcast this week. Why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide insights on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Willtown Tech, and I'm at Anshel. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.